Hey, welcome to the High Siren Pub. I'm Siren, and I am coming to you with spooky tales to tell. There will be 3 stories, so this is going to be a short and sweet stream to see how well this goes. I will also be in the chat to interact with y'all. I hope you have your favorite drink and snacks ready, as you join me on the fun to the dark side. Sorry if this is a long post, but I needed to share this with someone. There is this abandoned warehouse in the middle of my city. Not in the middle, but in the busy part of the city. The reason nobody has done anything about it is because the warehouse used to be owned by a petroleum company. They used it to store oil before the city expanded. Now there's a flyover running over it, and the property is owned by the city and the railway commission because of the railway line that runs next to it. Anyway, it's just a building that used to be part of a massive complex of warehouses, silos, and a factory. Now only this one building remains. A friend and I like exploring abandoned places, mainly for the experience and to imagine what it would have been like when the places were active and functioning. So we were looking for places to explore, and I had known about this location. It is quite close to where we live. So I suggested if we could explore the warehouse. My friend jumped at the chance and we set a date, Saturday morning. We decided to go early in the morning because that area is known for shady things and the nights weren't safe. It also gets busy during the midday. Anywho, we went at around 7 a.m., walked over there since it's not too far. When we reached the place, it was messy. Garbage piled up in the corner and the compound wall tagged with graffiti. We had to find a way to get in. As we walked around, we discovered there was no way in from the street. It was just wall all the way down. We had to get in from the railway track. So we walked around and entered the railway tracks. From the railway tracks, you could see the flyover that runs over it and an apartment next to the warehouse. This place is like in the middle of all the action, yet is in its own bubble lost in time. On the other side of the tracks is the army and railway property. We eventually found a break in the wall that allowed us to enter the place. We had to hop over it, and there was an old broken freezer just lying on the other side. So people have come in here before. When we stepped in, and I kid you not, I felt this overwhelming sense of dread. Yeah, it sounds cliche as hell, but I just felt something was off. I told my friend this, and she just shrugged it off, like it was no big deal. She basically said it's probably because we are trespassing, and we could get caught. Inside, there was a lot of overgrown poppy plants and wild weeds just growing out of the cement. We had to check through this brief bit of foliage, and once we did, we stepped into the compound. The compound was big, but I couldn't sense the size of it, because a good amount was covered in overgrown wild foliage. But we could see the warehouse building rising over it, in its imposing and dilapidated form. My friend was excited to see this. She pulled out her phone and took some pictures. I looked around, and the feeling was just getting worse. I then walked further into the compound, and that's when I saw it. On the ground, just bones. Like animal bones. It was a whole field of bones, just strewn about on the ground. I freaked. I'm a guy who does not believe in superstition, but I do think curses and black magic and the supernatural is a possibility. So when I saw a literal compound full of bones, like skulls, femurs, teeth, and whole animal skeletons, compounded with the feeling of intense dread and doom. A feeling that I get when someone close to me is about to die. I wanted to get out of there. I had told my friend that we needed to leave. She still wanted to explore. She was walking all over the bones and kicking them around. I was watching this and getting more scared. I asked her why there would be a whole bunch of bones here. She said she didn't know and didn't really care. Now, she doesn't really believe in anything supernatural. Ghosts don't exist in her mind, and curses and black magic are just psychological sleight of hand. To be honest, I kind of think the same way, but also I don't dismiss the idea that someone can get cursed, or a place can be cursed. So for her, this is just fun. For me, terrifying. I was carefully watching my step, trying my best to avoid the bones. She was just trampling all over them. I didn't want to explore further, and she did. I somehow convinced her that we needed to leave. And she finally conceded, realizing I was actually scared for my life. After we left and on the way back, I realized that feeling I got had not gone. I told her this. She said I was probably paranoid. Funny thing, I never mentioned this earlier because I personally think it's a coincidence. But there is always that nagging feeling at the back of my mind that it's not. Now for as long as I can remember, on some level I have the ability to sense when someone is about to die. Like they can be healthy, young, old or sick. But if they are about to die, I can sense it. Many times even before they realize. Like it only comes when I'm close to the person physically or interacting with them. But I have to be around and in some kind of contact with them. Basically, when I'm with them, I can't get the thought of death out of my head. That was the feeling I was getting when I was with her after we left. Mind you, I never got that feeling before we entered the place. No, I instantly got it after we left. I told her this. Like I just told her I thought we might be cursed, and that one of us is going to die. She, as usual, made a joke out of it, and then semi-seriously said that I wasn't invited to her funeral if she died. But I told her that I was not going back there. She agreed, and we went back home. Cut to a few days later, we were planning to watch a movie when she suddenly canceled on me because she fell sick. That feeling had not gone. In fact, it came back stronger. She jokingly mentioned it was the curse. I just laughed, but at the back of my mind, I was wondering if it actually was. Then a few days after that, I find out she has been admitted in the hospital. The condition was getting worse. The rest I found out from her parents because she had slipped into a coma shortly after that. The doctors were trying everything, and they couldn't figure out why she wasn't recovering. Then one night, I was just sitting on my computer watching videos, and when I got the feeling again, stronger than ever this time. Like stronger than I had ever got before. Funny thing, no one was around me, and I wasn't talking to anyone either. The only thought I had was someone is going to die. I couldn't focus on what I was doing. Just the thought of death. I thought I was going to die. And the feeling got worse and worse. I tried to fight the feeling and shake it off, but it wouldn't go. Then suddenly it stopped, and all I could feel was sadness. I went to sleep. The next morning, I find out from my parents that my friend had passed away last night in the hospital. I have never been in that warehouse again. My dad was military, so we had to move the summer before my senior year in high school. I wasn't taking it well. Senior year is supposed to be special. Graduation parties, prom, senior pranks. Instead, my senior year became memorable for a far darker reason. One that still keeps me up at night. Once school started, I kept to myself, sitting in a secluded area inside, next to the cafeteria, before the bell rang. I didn't know anyone, so I figured why not? About 2 weeks in, I noticed it. One Monday morning, someone had drawn a doodle on the wall next to my chair. Next to the doodle was a speech bubble, like in a comic book. It simply said, "Hello." The doodle was basic. A circular head with black eyes and a big toothless smile, stick figure arms waving. I thought it'd be funny to write back, so I pulled out a Sharpie and wrote, "Hello." That was all. The next day, I returned to my spot, and to my surprise, someone had written back. It read, "Nice to meet you. What's your name?" Weirdly, there was no trace of my previous writing. I wrote my name, and thus began our correspondence. The person would ask basic questions, and I would answer. Whenever I asked anything about them, they simply wrote, "I'm your friend." The doodle itself changed slightly each time, sometimes a thumbs up, sometimes a wink. I was amazed at how clean the doodle looked every time. I thought maybe the janitor was writing to me and painting over the wall to reply. The following Monday, things got weird. That morning, the doodle wasn't smiling. It had angry eyebrows and hands on its hips. The text read, "Where were you?" It caught me off guard. Did this person come back over the weekend to continue talking? I wrote back, "It was the weekend. WTF?" At lunch, I decided to eat at my spot. I looked over at the doodle, expecting it to have the same text from the morning, but it had changed again. It read, "Don't leave me again. Friends don't leave friends." I thought whoever was writing to me was either kidding or taking this too seriously. I wrote back goodbye with a sad face. That was the last time I replied. I avoided that area out of annoyance, hoping the artist would get the hint. I made a couple of friends and started hanging out with them in the morning. After a couple of weeks, I nearly forgot about the doodle, but then it came back. One morning, I opened my locker to find it completely trashed. On the back of the wall of the locker was that damn doodle, more detailed this time, with teary eyes. The text read, "Why did you leave me? We were friends." Whoever this was had taken it too far. I told my new friends, and they wanted to see it. When I opened my locker, everything was clean. They thought I was messing with them, but I was unnerved. How did they do that? I grabbed everything from my locker and never used it again. The following week in second period, I got scared. I walked into class to see students gathered around my desk, talking frantically. Someone had scribbled all over my desk, "You're a bad friend." In the middle of the desk was a squashed cockroach. The way it was killed made it look like the doodle. I spoke with my teacher and told her everything. She had asked me to show her the doodle, but it was gone from every place it had been. I had felt like a freak. People moved on from the desk incident after a few days, and I kept my head low. My friends were a good distraction as we joked around and talked about anime. I never mentioned the doodle to them again. Several weeks had passed without incident. I thought it was over, but there was one more encounter. During fourth period, I went to the bathroom. No one else was there. When I closed the stall door, there it was again. This time, the doodle was more detailed, screaming and clawing at its face. The words, "I'll unalive you," was scrawled all over the door. I had had enough. I grabbed toilet paper and tried to wipe it off. The smear turned red, like blood. No matter how much I wiped, the red ink remained. It looked like I was smearing blood all over the door. My hand was covered in red ink. I ran to the sink, but the more water and soap I used, the larger the red stain became. It looked like my hand was bleeding. I grabbed a paper towel, but it just stained it. The stain made me run home. The paper towel had the doodle's screaming face in red ink. It took a long time to clean my hands completely. I now hated going to school. Every day I was scared of what I might find. The bathroom showed no sign of ink, red or black, but one day, at my second period desk, there was a note in the corner. "I'm sorry, goodbye," with a small broken heart next to it. That was the last note I ever received from my mysterious pen pal. At the beginning of the next semester, I saw another student writing something on the wall where I used to sit. Was this my stalker? I went over to confront him, but then I saw the doodle, just as it had been. He was writing back to it. I wanted nothing to do with that, so I left. 3 weeks later, that boy was reported missing. He just disappeared one day. One morning, walking into first period, I stopped to tie my shoe near my old spot. I looked at the wall. The doodle was there, but with another one next to it. I got closer and thought, that looks like the missing guy. The second doodle was screaming. The text above them read, "Do you want to be our friend?" When I walked into our house, I was expecting Mom to be there with a frozen bag of peas. She knew the drill. It wasn't my first fight at Round Valley Middle School, but I knew it would be my last. By Monday, every locker, classroom, and lost pair of sweatpants would be under 200 feet of water. But Mom wasn't there. The house was quiet. "Mom," I said. It was 1 p.m., 3 hours earlier than I normally got home. Dad was usually in his office on a work call, with Mom in the kitchen working on her next strange project. For the last few weeks, it had been pickling carrots. When I walked toward the kitchen, I saw a note on the counter. "Billy, went into town to finalize some things. Be home around 5. P.S. Don't let anyone inside the house, even if you know them. Love, Mom and Dad." I crumpled up the piece of paper and threw it in the trash. Then I went to the freezer for my peas. The boy who punched me was an old friend of mine, although we hadn't been friends for a few weeks. Ever since the town decided to forego our land and turn it into a reservoir, the energy at school shifted. In a way, it felt like our lives were ending, even though the mayor said we were simply moving up the hill. Apparently, reservoirs were good for generating power, and would help fund the town's longevity, blah blah blah. When I told Dad about that, he simply nodded, then changed the subject. "Whatever they tell you," he said, then started taping up another box. I didn't really understand it. All I did understand was that everything I ever knew would soon be gone. I opened the freezer and pulled out the peas. As I pressed them onto my face, the pain intensified. He got a really good shot at me this time. The fight happened during math class. The teacher scribbled some numbers on the board, then called on me to say what they equaled. I made up a number. 54, I said. The class laughed. My face felt hot. "No," she said. "Sometimes something will take the place of something else, like a symbol taking the place of a number. In this case, the answer is X." More laughter. "Don't worry, Billy," my old friend said, turning to face me. "The monster isn't going to feed on stupid people." When I opened my eyes again, I was on the ground, collapsed between the overturned chairs. He was underneath me, his face covered in blood. People started screaming. I didn't know what I was doing, but I felt better. Then he managed to get a fist free and hit me in the eye. I fell back. The teacher pulled me off him. Then an hour later, I was suspended. They didn't even bother calling my mom this time. The principal told me to walk home. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, the cold offering relief as my thoughts did the opposite. I hated being the problem child. I wished I could be more like my sister, even though I kind of hated her. Then, as if she heard me, the door opened. I turned to look. "Shouldn't you be at school?" she asked. My sister was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed. Bailey? I could just make her out, my good eye decoding the shapes. "What happened to your eye?" she asked. "What happened to boarding school?" I asked, mimicking her tone. "I took the bus in," she said. "I wanted to spend one more night at the house before they drown us." I sat down at the kitchen and took the peas off. My whole face was getting numb. Bailey sat down across from me. It was strange that she had come back. Her school was 2 hours away by bus. She wasn't supposed to be home until the holidays. So, she said, pointing at my face, your eye. It was nothing, I said. Is someone bullying you? No, I whined. Just stop. She raised her hands in surrender. Okay, fine, she said. I'm not trying to make you upset. She looked different today. It had been the longest time we'd ever been apart. I didn't realize how much a face could change in just a few weeks. Mom and Dad are going to be so mad you're skipping boarding school, I said. I got permission, she said. My teachers thought the reservoir was a mean thing to do to our town. I shrugged, hating that I agreed with her. It wasn't fair that we had to move just because some energy company wanted to build the reservoir. Plus, this whole situation led to a bunch of silly rumors. According to the boys at my lunch table, there was some creature living in the woods and the water was a way to wash it out. In the last few weeks, a few dogs turned up dead, along with an old woman in her home. According to some eyewitness accounts, aka drunks, different townspeople had been wandering down Main Street on the night of each attack. Apparently, their mouths were covered in blood. Then the next day, those same people would be walking around town like nothing happened. Johnny from school said it might be a skinwalker, I said to Mom a few nights after they announced the reservoir. The three of us were around the dinner table, barely already off to boarding school. That's silly, Mom said. I think you should switch lunch tables. Dad went on to say that monsters weren't real. The dogs got attacked by a bear. The old woman fell down the stairs. The rumors were just rumors. I was thinking about those rumors as Bailey leaned forward. She brought her voice to a whisper. Do you believe them? She asked. Do I believe what? Those rumors, she said. I shook my head. The punch must have knocked a few screws loose. Was I saying that out loud? I asked. Bailey shrugged. I wouldn't call it a monster, she said, then smiled. Maybe it's just hungry. I looked at her for a moment. She was always correcting me, like everything I said was the stupidest thing she'd ever heard. It wasn't enough that she was the pretty one, too. She had bleach blonde hair, blue eyes, and freckles, while I got left with black hair and dirt eyes. Our whole lives, people would stop us on the street and say how cute she was, how she should model or date their sons. I figured I would at least get the brains, but she got that too. She excelled so much at school that the boarding school across the state reached out to us to see if Mom and Dad would send her there, free of charge. I asked if I could go too, and my parents said they could never afford that. So I was stuck at the school down the road with the peeling paint and cockroaches. Tell me about this new school, she said. Where is it going to be? Just up the hill, I said. It's all the same, though. Same teachers, students, bullshit. Bailey smiled, then stood up. She went to the kitchen and grabbed an apple. She pulled a small knife out of the knife block and sliced off a piece. Change can be good, she said, sliding the cut apple into her mouth. She smiled as she chewed, bits of apple flying out and onto the table. She was normally such a prime and proper eater. It was strange to see her so ravenous. Within seconds, she took the knife and sliced off another piece, then slid it into her nasty, apple-filled mouth. I don't want things to change, I said. Before I knew what was happening, the apple was gone. No core, no stems. It had disappeared. Did you eat the... By the way, she said, her mouth empty again. When do our parents get home? I paused for a moment, inspecting her. I had never done any drugs, but maybe she had started to do them. I knew it made people a little weird. And she was definitely being a little weird. If not, a lot weird. Soon, I said. They'll be home soon. Bailey nodded, then glided the knife across her fingertips, pressing down on the skin just enough so it didn't break. It looked like she got some kind of pleasure from the pain. "Are you okay?" I asked. Bailey nodded, but wouldn't look at me. She looked preoccupied by something. "There's barely any trees up the hill," she said. I kept staring at her. She pushed the blade too hard and sliced her thumb. No blood came out. "Bailey," I said, "you cut yourself." "It's no good up the hill," she whispered, shaking her head. "The valley was perfect." My muscles tightened. I kept looking at her, scanning for cracks. This was Bailey. It looked like her, smiled like her, talked like her. But something was off. A cold wind coming up from the cellar. I knew I wasn't smart, or good-looking, or charming. But if there was anything I did have, it was intuition. I knew which crop seasons would be good or bad. I always knew when it was going to rain a few hours before. I knew if Mom or Dad were upset by something. When I felt something, it took over all of my senses. And I definitely felt something here. I stood up from the chair and took a step back. Now, Bailey's eyes locked onto me. She held the knife in her hand and stepped toward me. "You look frightened," she said. I couldn't talk. My spit dried up. "Don't be frightened," she said. "Tight muscles aren't good for me." I covered my face as Bailey leapt toward me. Before it all went dark, I could see her features melt away, like wax dripping down a candle. Her blonde hair turned to straw grass. Her eyes twisted to something small and beady, like mouse eyes. Her skin wrinkled, then glowed soft and red. She made it sound like an eagle on fire. It filled my head instantly, ravaging my thoughts. As her hands gripped my shoulders, I flew back into the wall, slamming my head on a picture frame. Her breath was hot and rancid, like summer pond scum. Then I heard another sound. The screen door flew open. She jumped off me, and I listened as her claws tapped across on hardwood. I opened my eyes. Bailey, or whatever she was gone. Mom and Dad were standing in the doorway. They ran over to me and lifted me up. Dad looked around, the color stripped from his face. Mom looked like she was going to vomit. "Was it here?" Dad asked. I still couldn't speak. "We don't need to finish packing," Mom said. "Let's just go. We can buy new things." "But Bailey," I finally said. "We'll call her at the hotel," Dad said, then lifted me on my feet and pushed me out the door. A moment later, we were in the car. I kept looking out the window, waiting to see her again. Then, in the distance, I noticed something. In the cornfield next to our house, a few rows of crop were flattened, the stalks around them shaking. The hotel was full of people from the town, like some kind of refugee camp. I even saw my old friend who I punched. When we locked eyes, we nodded to one another, like the whole encounter had created some kind of respect between us. When the shaking in my hands finally went down, I took a shower and got ready for bed. As I laid there on the stiff motel mattress, I listened as Mom tried and failed to call Bailey's school. By the third attempt, my heart sank. Mom looked worried too. Then, miraculously, I heard her voice. "Sorry," I heard through the phone. "I was at the library. Big exam coming up." Mom continued on with the conversation, her worry melting away. Meanwhile, Dad came over and sat on the bed next to me. He put his hand on my knee and looked at me. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, then shook my head. "Sure," I said. "Maybe. I don't know." "Maybe is good," he said. As Mom went on asking her standard check-in questions, I could hear Dad's breathing pick up. He was normally a rock. Now, he looked like a scared child. I looked up at him. What was that thing? I whispered. Dad looked at me, then shook his head. Just get some rest, he said. The waters will be here soon. That is all I have for you. These same stories are posted for your enjoyment over on my YouTube channel, Hi Siren Horror. That will be �HIGHSIRENHORROR. Until then, stay cozy and take a look at my previous unvoiced streams in the distance. Have a restful night, and I will see you next time.